and welcome to this demonstration of driving continuous delivery with continuous testing. In the modern software factory, it is key that we can take our ideas from that initial concept stage and then drive those through our delivery pipeline with very high quality to the point where we can deliver them to our customers with value. And in this demonstration, we'll show you how using CA's tools we can achieve that. So what we're going to show you is how first we gather our requirements in Agile Central. We can take those into Requirements Designer to model them and also generate test cases. And that information is then stored back in Agile Central so the business is aware of what test cases are being generated and those result sets. We'll then show you how we're going to make a commit into a build tool. So that build tool will kick off a release. We'll drive our CA Continuous Delivery Director to start that release, which will automate the release with CA Atomic. And then as it goes through that deployment process, we'll use other tool sets. So we're going to use CA Test Data Manager to generate our test data. We're going to use our CA Service Virtualization to replace a service that isn't available for our testing, but we're going to make it available as a virtual service. We'll use CA Vericode to scan the code to make sure that we're actually compliant with our security needs. And then run a batch of testing, and those tests will be performance, API, and UI testing. So let's start with a demonstration. So let's start with our requirements. So we're looking here at CA Agile Central, and each of these boxes equates to a user story. And we can see in the Kanban board they're in various states. Some are completed, some in progress, some defined. And we're going to start with actually updating a user story with our requirements and then show you how we can then drive that through our requirements designer. So we're going to start with this user story 2. So user story 2 is for adding support for UK national insurance numbers. And so far what we've done is we've just got the name of the user story, and you can see down here in the description field there's no description. So we're going to paste in our description. So the description is quite easy. What we need to do is support a certain format, and we have some notes here from the requirements team as to how we need to achieve this. So at this point, the business is actually given the requirements into Agile Central, and if we scroll down, the business will also decide on which release we want this user story to be deployed into, and we're going to show it as being in Q2. So the business has now decided on what the requirements are and what release we're going to target this, and if I press save, that's now saved. And what we're going to do now is go and look at how we can leverage these requirements in Agile Requirements Designer. So we're now in Agile Requirements Designer, and we can model our requirements manually. So if I just create a new requirement, we start with just a simple building block of a start and an end. We can then take these blocks on the left-hand side to build out our requirements. And you can see here, you join these together. It's very simple. Now what we're going to show you is how we can actually import these requirements. So we're going to delete this and use our connector framework to import from Agile Central. So on the left-hand side, we have our connector framework. And you see here we have a list of sources that we can import from. And we're going to use the CA Agile Central connector. On the right-hand side, this is the tree structure that we've got from Agile Central. So we've got our project, the medical record apps. We have our releases. Now we're going to use the Q2. And if you remember, we assigned our user story to release Q2. And here's the user story we're going to work on. So we can just drag that onto our workspace and import that into our flow. We now have converted that text into a flow, and we can now model this within the tool. So we can remove these links between the various requirements. We can change these objects to say they're decisions. We can obviously restructure them. We can then modify the layout. And we can actually build out our requirements and use this as a discussion point when we're discussing with the business their requirements. Now let's go to one that we've done earlier. So we've taken this and we've already modeled it, and here's the fully modeled version. So at the top here we've got the steps. So we're going to start, we're going to go to a website, then we have a login option and various things to do, and we're going to go into this object. And in this object you can see we've got various options. So within the tool we can generate system data, We can find system data. We can also, in the automation section, automate the creation of the test scripts. So we've said that when we actually get the administrator login, these are the tasks need to be done within the script. So we need to actually click on a button, enter some details, and this is using the code snippets that have been defined in the product. So you can see at this step, we have various tasks within the script to run. And for each of these steps, you'll find those tasks are different. If we go to the next option, we only have one task. And what we can do is when we actually generate the test scripts, we'll create a unique test script for each path through this flow. So let me show you that. We're going to go to our Path Explorer. Now the Path Explorer can show you how many possible paths there are through a flow. So if we look at this one and I flick through here, you'll see this is showing you all the different routes that the tool has calculated that need to be tested. So if we were to test every possible path, there's 58. Now obviously 58 tests, that's not a problem. If this was 5,000 tests, you might be saying, but we can't get through those 5,000 tests in the time that we have. So we need to be clever as to what test cases we run. So we can use the optimization to actually identify what's the best full coverage in our edges. So give us good coverage and cover the major blocks, as you can see here. We can then do this in 10 tests. So we've now reduced that 58 tests down to 10. Imagine these were thousands and we can get it down to hundreds. So we can then test just efficiently in the time that you have. Now we've actually saved one of these test cases, this one here. And if I click on the automation and we just refresh this screen, what you'll see is we've generated the test script. So we've taken the automation code snippets from each of these blocks and combined them into a script. And what we're going to do is show you how we can take this test case, attach it back to Agile Central, and also generate a test case to be run in the app test tool. So first we're going to export this test case. I'm going to export it back to Agile Central. So here's our user story we've been working on. Here's our test case. We click OK. So we've now, obviously there could have been hundreds of test cases here. We've just reattached back that user story. In our case, it's just the one. And if I click on the external links, what we'll see is that test case 6 has been generated inside Agile Central and attached to the test case we're looking at. We're now going to export the actual script itself so we can run the test. And we're going to export this to our CA app test tool. So first we need to select a framework that the actual test case gets put inside, and that's that file there. We then identified that within the script there's a Selenium script, and we're just going to choose the code snippet library to use. And the last thing is, where do you want to store these? So we're going to store them on our testing folder, and we click next. And we've now exported that test case. So at this point, the test case is within our app test library. And also we've updated our Agile Central with the fact that we've created a test case. And if we go back to our Agile Central tool, what we can see is, here's our user story. If I just refresh this screen, we've now got a test case assigned to this user screen story. So here's our user story and here's our test case. If I click on that, you'll see test case 6 is now assigned. So the business can now see the test cases have been created. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see there's no verdicts, there's no builds. You see the icon is grey. That's because this test case has never been run. So the business at this point know that the test cases are created. And as we go through the demonstration, we'll see the results getting posted back to Agile Central. So let's go on to that next stage of the demonstration. So for the demonstration, we're going to use WebLogic as our target application. So this is the application we're going to use, and it's a simple medical record app. And what we're going to do is we're going to show how we can create an update, deploy it to WebLogic, and then test it. Now, as part of this testing, what we need is various things. We need a virtual service, we need test data, and if we drill into the application, what we can show you is, if I log in as administrator, we have some data within the application that we need to recreate. So in this case, it's patient data. So these are names of patients. And if I drill into one of these patients, we've got details like their dates of birth, their social security numbers. These are all things that we need to actually protect, and we're going to use synthetic data as part of our testing. So let's start with how we actually do this deployment. So we're going to go to our continuous delivery director screen. So this is the dashboard that shows us the releases inside our environment. The dashboard on the left shows us how many of our tasks are automated, how much our failure rate is. We have details on, as you can see here, how long we're spending in each environment, so how much time is spent doing manual tasks and automated tasks. So all the information required to actually improve the efficiency of our delivery pipeline. And we're going to go and look at our release. So if we go to our releases screen. So this is our releases screen, and basically what this shows you is each of these columns is what we call a phase. These are the things you need to do to get from development to production. So in development, we need to do various things. We need to generate test data. We need to provision a virtual service. In our case, we're going to use Docker to start a Selenium grid. We then need to deploy the new update to our WebLogic environment, at which point we can then run our tests. And we're going to run UI tests, performance tests, API tests, and run a security scan. We can then check that all those tests have passed, and if they have passed, we can then deprovision this environment, notify the development team that we're ready, and we could also promote then into next environment. Now we have approval gates here, so in our case, we will actually stop pending approval. If these approval gates weren't set, we could automatically promote all the way through these phases. And as you can see, in each phase, basically we change slightly as we go through the phases. So as you get to pre-production, you may be testing with live data, not synthetic data. And obviously when you get to production, the phases change slightly because they're going to start disabling monitoring. You're going to do other things you need to do when you're deploying to production. And we've modeled here everything we need to do for each of our deployment phases. Now on the left-hand side, what we've also got here is this content here is coming from Agile Central. So this tool is used by the release teams, and they can tell from this that for this release, this is the payload. These are the user stories being developed as part of this release. Now, if you remember, we added our national insurance number to this release, and if I refresh this panel, you'll see that that is automatically added to this screen. So there's our user story. So the team using this product can now see all of those user stories assigned to the release, and they understand what's being delivered as part of this release. So let's go and start deployment. So for our deployment, we actually need to start some Docker containers. These are to actually run a Selenium grid. So in this screen, we can just see this is our Docker management screen. We can see they're stopped. We'll come back to this in a little while. And we're going to go to Jenkins next. So Jenkins is our build tool. And you can see here, these are the builds that have run, and the last build is 119, which is what we saw on the application landing page. And we're going to trigger a new build. So I click on build now. So we're going to build 120, and that's just started, as you can see there. And we're going to go back to CDD. And what you're going to see is in this first phase, Jenkins will generate the build and then automatically trigger our build into development. So the first thing we've done is we've actually notified our development team. We've sent a FlowDoc notification to say that the build has just started. We've noted the build has just started, build 120. And now what we're doing is we're doing three things. One is we're starting our Docker grid. We're also starting virtual services in our virtual service tool, and we're generating test data. So while that's running, let's go to our Docker UI. So if I just refresh this, you'll see that those Docker containers have been started. And we're going to go to the dev test portal, and we can look at our virtual service console. And we can see here that this virtual service has just been started. So we've now got the virtual service we need for our testing, and we've got our Docker containers running for our grid. And if we go to our test data manager and just refresh this screen here, what we'll see is we've submitted a publish job. So what we're doing is we're actually generating new data. That patient data I showed you, we've actually deleted that from the database, and we're now generating new synthetic records. And what you see in a few seconds is this job will start, and that job will be to publish this new data into the database. When that's finished, the secondary thing we're going to do is then take that data and then extract a record that we can use for our testing. So you can see the test has just started. And in a few seconds, you'll see that that published job has finished. There you go. So we've now generated our records in the database. And we can go to the reservation screen. And what we'll see here is we're going to reserve a record from that newly generated data that we can use for testing. So we've injected data into the database. And you can see here, we've also then extracted a record from that. So this user, Eve Poker, has been extracted, and that will what we'll use for our UI testing to make sure that we're working. If we go back to our CDD, you'll see that these tasks are now completing. So as you saw, the grid is completed, the virtual service is started, and our test data has been generated, which means we can now move on to the next step in our release. And you can see there we just started, and this is actually taking that code that Jenkins has generated and deploying it into our WebLogic environment. And this is using Atomic. So we're going to go and look at the Atomic screen. So if I just refresh this screen, you'll see that the things we just run have been these workflows. And this is the workflow that's currently running. So let's just drill into that. And we can then monitor the workflow that's running. And here it is here. If I just expand this, basically we have 4 steps. So first we stop the app server, then we undeploy it, then we deploy it, and then we start it. And if I refresh the screen, you'll see that we've stopped the app server. We're currently undeploying it, and then we're going to deploy it. So if we go to our web server and I just refresh this screen, what we'll find is it's currently offline. Now, obviously, in a production environment, this would be supported with a cluster, and what we'd be doing here is updating the cluster, and we wouldn't have an outage. So that undeploy is just about finished. And then, like I said, we're then going to deploy the updated version of the build that Jenkins just generated before going through the start process. So we're now into the deployment phase. So we're now deploying this update into our WebLogic server. And as soon as that's finished, we'll then do the final phase, which is then starting that server back up. So we're now starting the server back up, and let's just go back to our web server and refresh this screen. So the server's back up. We can now see it's build 120. That's the build that came from Jenkins. And if we drill into this, we can now see that the data that's been generated by our test data management tool has been added to the database. So if we drill into here, there's the user that you saw our test data manager selected for the testing. And we drill into it, all this data we're seeing on the screen has been synthetically generated. So this user does not exist, and none of this data exists. However, it is syntactically correct. So you can see the first name and the last name are rolled in to make a valid email address. We know that Eve's a female name. So this has all been done through the rules within test data management. Now in CDD, what we can now see is that deployment's finished, which means we can start testing. So you can see here, we've now started our testing phase. So we're doing 3 tests. We're going into our dev test tool to run UI and API testing. We're also going to run some performance tests using BlazeMeter. And we're going to do some automated API testing using the SaaS platform. So in this case, we're testing some external APIs that we need as part of our development process. So if we go to our dev test portal, we're going to go to tests. And what we'll see here is the tests that are running on the dev test platform. So on this screen, you can see that we've ran 2, 3, 4. Number 6 is running. So if you remember, test case 6 was the test that we actually generated within the ARD product. If I drill into test case 3, what we'll see is the data we use to actually test the UI is here. So the user that we saw in TDM and we just saw in the application was used by the UI tool to make sure that the UI was working properly for that particular user. And when this final test passes, which it should be complete by now, we should now see that test case 2, 3, 4, and 6 have all passed. And if you go back to our CDD tool, you can see there that task is now complete. So from this one screen, we can say that we're now in the testing phase, and that initial test is completed. The BlazeMeter and the API testing are running, and the Veracode scan will come out in just a second. So let's go and look at BlazeMeter. And what we'll see is, as you can see here, we have 2 tests. Now that test just finished, and this test is currently running. So this is our performance test. And what we're doing here is we're generating a load on the machine we just deployed. So BlazeMeter is a SaaS product, but also it supports an on-premise agent. So in our instance here, we're testing an on-premise installation from the SaaS platform. And when this completes, that will then pass the results back into Agile Central that we'll come back to in just a second. So if we go back to our CDD tool, you can see that the API test completed, and we're just waiting for the performance test to complete. And while we're doing that, we'll go and look at Veracode. So in this case, we're using a manual step, and we're doing that because we want to go and manually check the Veracode scan report to check for if it passed the security scans. So we're going to go and log into Veracode. So we just log in with our user. And what we did is during the build process, we actually published the build into Veracode to be scanned. So you can see here our Jenkins build 120. The scan is completed. It's green because we passed the validation test. And if I go and look at the report, what we can show here is there are some issues. You can see here we have some issues. However, if we go to our policy control screen, this actual application, the policy is medium. And basically we meet that criteria. So the requirements are that the analysis score must be greater than 70, and we're 98. There must be no high flaws, and there are none. So we actually, even though there are some issues, we actually pass the requirements for this particular level of security. But we can drill into those issues and look at the findings of the scan. So you can see here we have some findings. It explains what the finding is, a link to more details on what it found, along with some indication as to how long it may take to resolve an issue like this. So if this were an issue and this hadn't passed, we can make a business decision based on how much effort it is to fix the problem before we go into production. Now in our example, we passed the test, so we can actually mark this as complete and move on. And if we go back to CDD, we now see that all the tests have completed, and we're just pending this manual step. Now these manual steps can be used for many things. They could also be used if you have a manual step in your process, perhaps a manual test you need to go and run. So we're now going to mark this test as done, so we can then proceed. Now if I'd failed the test at this point, the release would stop, but we're going to say it's done, and we can now move on. And you can see now we've moved on to the next step. Now the next step is we're checking, did all the test cases for our release pass? If they didn't, again, we would have stopped, but they passed. And we can then go on to do a few things. So we can deprovision our virtual services, we can deprovision our grid, and we can tell the development team that we're done in this phase. So you can see they're completed. And we can show that by, if we go back to our Docker screen and refresh this, you can see we stopped those Docker containers. If we go back to our dev test screen and just refresh the screen, you'll see that that virtual service is stopped. So that environment we use for our testing has been cleaned up. And we can also go and look at our flow doc screen. So throughout that demonstration, you would have seen various messages being posted to the development team. You can see here, we had a message to say that the build has started in development. A message say it's been successful. And also in the inbox, you're seeing here, the test results are being posted to Agile Central. So as an engineer, I've got a view of the status of our deployments. But also I can look at these and actually drill into these and actually look at the fact that we ran test case 5, it passed, we have details on this, and we're going to show this now within Agile Central. But from an engineering perspective, I don't need to go and look in Agile Central or in CDD. The flow doc is the flow that shows me, and I can share this with my team, so I can post messages here to share with the team about this build. But let's go to Agile Central. And what we can show here, if I just refresh this screen, is various things. So on the right hand side, you'll see we now have test cases. So from here, we can see the test cases ran. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They all ran. We can see the results. So they all passed. And also, if we go into the actual user stories, you can see these flasks. If I drill into these, again, we can see that test case 1 has run. Build was 120. That's the Jenkins build. I can drill into this. And what we've got here is the link to the results, but also the link to BlazeMeter. So I can then drill into that report in BlazeMeter to go and look at the results of that test case. So here's our performance test case. So from Agile Central, we've got the link back to BlazeMeter to look at this. If there's been a failed test case, we can go and look at BlazeMeter, look at the logs, understand what happened. If I go back to our Kanban board and we look at the other user story, so remember we also ran an API test. So again, we can drill into here, we've got our results. In the same way, it's all consistent. And here's our API report. So again, if I drill into there, now this is a different screen because we're looking at the API test, not a performance test. And what we've got here is we ran a batch of positive and negative and edge cases. So a negative test here, we can drill into this, we can show that we expected to get a 400 and we did. So that test passed. Whereas on the positive tests, we expected to get a 200 and we did. So at the top of the screen here, we can show that this range of tests all passed. And again, we go back into Agile Central. So we've now looked at our performance tests and API tests. We've also got here, these are the tests that we ran within dev test. And again, like with BlazeMeter, we have the results and also a link back to our dev test tool to look at the reports. And finally, if you remember at the very start, we actually started with user story 2. We generated this test case 6, and we now have results. So that test case we generated in ARD ran as part of our automated deployment. And like all the other tests, we have the build from Jenkins, the output from the test case, and the link back to that test to review the report in our dev test product. So that concludes our demonstration. And what we just showed you was how we could take our requirements from Agile Central, refine those in Requirements Designer, and generate our test cases. We then used our service virtualization product to create a virtual service as part of our development testing. We used our test data management product to create synthetic test data. We then ran our tests within the CA application test framework. And we also used CA BlazeMeter to run performance testing and API testing. And we used CA Veracode to automate the application security scan of the code that came out of Jenkins. And all this was automated with CA Continuous Delivery Director and Automic. And we could have gone one step further and then integrated this with our CA Digital Experience Insight to actually look at how the end users used that deployment when we deployed it into production. So, thank you for your time. If you'd like more information about CA's continuous testing story, please visit the URL on the screen. Thank you.